Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this talk. My name's Joe Greer. My actual name is Pedro Jose Greer, which my father still laughs about all the time. And they called me Joe because I went to school in the South and nobody could pronounce Pedro. It was like Vanna White handing out vowels. I'm of Cuban-Irish descent. That means I'm from one poor, small, corrupt Catholic island to another. And so you go through life, do I light a fuse, do I light a cigar? I have no idea. What I actually do is I'm a physician, I'm in academic medicine now, but I'm going to take you through not what to do, but why I did it. And what were the experiences in my life that made me go in the different directions that I did. Apparently you can't stand there. There's an X. I was born in Miami by accident. My mother was visiting. My parents had actually come here in the 40s. My father was going to medical school in Cuba. My father's the first one in our family to finish high school. Let's go to college or medical school. My father says we're the only ones that lost nothing when Fidel took over. I said, how's that? He said, well, we had nothing, son, so we lost nothing really. And America was the land that gave my father the opportunity to become successful. He's 85 years old and he just retired this year. Under duress, I might add. And growing up and seeing your father as a physician who loved medicine, I wanted to do anything but go to medical school. So, having grown up in the 60s and in the 70s, which was probably one of the most wonderful times to grow up as you saw all the changes that were occurring, all the bad things. We're that generation that was going to save the world. Then we had that party. So now we expect your generation to do this? Well, we sort of screwed up along the way. The world needs to change, the world needs to be saved. And why? Because it just does. Growing up, we grew up in Westchester, which eventually became Westchester. And we were the first Cubans there, and it was an all-Jewish neighborhood. And like any good Hispanic family, of course, I got a cousin named Jesus. And so one of my best friends there, Lanny Schwartz, when I was growing up, he's a cardiologist now. I remember, only in Miami can you say, Lanny, meet Jesus. And so those were the things I grew up with. Growing up as Joe Greer, nobody knew I was Cuban. So boy, did I hear comments about my people and about people that were a little darker. And that was the South growing up. And in my high school when I was growing up, they burned a cross, the Ku Klux Klan. I had no idea what the hell that was. You can imagine a little Cuban kid, Ku Klux Klan. And that was Miami. In Miami, this vibrant city that now by United Nations statistics has more people born from outside the country than any other city in the world. And this is a city where we can make things happen. There is no old boy network. For all of you that are young and out there, you can make a difference, you can make a change. I started off college in political science. There was a war going on, not the ones we're going through now, the Vietnam War. The president resigned. I was disillusioned, tried philosophy. I figured yoga, my back was going to kill me. I ended up in physics, and then I ended up going to medical school with the idea that as a physician, I could serve people. I could take care of them. I could work anywhere in the world. I could do clinical, I could do research, I could do academics as I'm doing now. But nonetheless, it was a matter of serving and taking care of. I'm sorry that my profession has gotten so much into being a business. We're not supposed to be. We're supposed to be a profession. I ended up becoming a super subspecialist in hepatology and gastroenterology, now despecializing, running a department called the Department of Humanities, Health and Society that deals with the non-biologic causes of disease. And this is at FIU, which I might add, which is one of the great unique things about Miami, the first totally new curriculum in medical education in over 110 years in this country. And it's happening here in Miami. But I thought what I'd do starting off, since we're in the middle of the beginning of football season, I start off with a couple football stories. So if you bear with me, I wrote a book about 13 years ago, which 7 people bought. And you can get it on Amazon. Go for the used, you can buy them for a penny. The shipping will kill you. Christopher Columbus Catholic Boys High School in Miami had the worst football team in the history of Dade County, perhaps in the history of the world. We were a small ensemble, so small that some of us had to play both ways. That's offense and defense. When I was in high school, if you were a crack salesman, you were a great salesman. Today, you sell crack. You could fit our entire team in a mid-sized Subaru. We were so bad that the priest never prayed for victory. In the pregame, it was just praying for no injuries. We won our first game our junior year and went all the way through until the end of my senior year. 77 quarters without winning a game. Then came the homecoming game, November 1973, at the now gone, world-famous Orange Bowl. And we were playing our homecoming game at Miami High. Back then, Miami High were the urban Cubans of Miami. We were the suburban Cubans of Miami. And we got there, and they started yelling at us, "Arriba, abajo, Columbus, pa'l carajo." For those of you that are linguistically impaired, that means up, down, go to hell. Anyways, they were a tough team, but we ended up the first half not losing, but tied. Second half came about, we were competitive all the way through. And then with 2 minutes left to go in the game, we were down 13-20, just 15 yards away from scoring. We got up to the 2-yard line. On an half tackle play, our fullback went in, and now the score was tight. Miami High 20, Columbus 19, a minute 20 left. I got in the huddle. In the glare of the stadium lights of the world-famous Orange Bowl, I leaned forward and took my position in the huddle, my arms pressed upon my knees. I heard our quarterback call the play that would define our season, tackle eligible. The problem was I was the tackle. And an outside linebacker, I could feel the elbow pad slip down my sweat-soaked arm. My heart raced with a fear and mix of thrill and doom as I left the huddle and took my place on the field. I prayed every prayer I could in English and in Spanish. And the advantage of being bilingual, you can get a lot more prayers in Spanish than you can in English in the same amount of time. Then it all happened in slow motion. The ball was snapped, I blocked, shuffle left, went into the end zone. The ball left the quarterback's hand, and it arched slowly into the sky. And I jumped up, and I caught the ball. I caught the ball with my hands in the end zone. And I jumped and I jumped and I jumped in elation. We were up 21-20. We ended up blocking their field goal attempt. My teammates carried me off the field. I was much thinner then. And who would have guessed when the crowd used to cheer, "Go to hell"? There we were, the Three Stooges of football. A team that wasn't even prepared for victory. We had no victory song, no victory dance. We didn't even have a band. We had 5 guys with kazoos. And I've held the sweetness of that moment in my memory ever since. In moments of hopelessness, when forces seem to line up against any glimmer of victory, it has hoisted me once again in an orange rush of possibility and guided me to a better place with kazoos buzzing in my wake. It taught me never to give up. But once I started working, and especially working with the homeless, I realized that there's people in this world, in our country, in our backyard, that have never tasted anything like victory, that can never reach in and say, "I got accepted here. I got accepted there. I won this game." Nowadays, public schools are going through a country where you pay to play because the schools don't have money. So in the public schools where the kids have no money, unless they give $150, they can't even play football. So we're even taking that away from them. That is wrong. In the Brothers Karamazov, there's a paragraph that goes, "For every hour and every moment, thousands of men leave life on this earth, and their souls appear before God. And how many of them depart in solitude, unknown, sad, dejected, that no one mourns for them or even knows whether they had lived or not." TED Talk's a wonderful thing. I'm being broadcast to at least you folks. Hopefully my children will look at it. But when you're poor, you become a statistic. You become a certain percentage of this community. They have these diseases, they have this, they have that. But we get to come here and you get to say, "Oh, that's Joe," or Pedro, or Pedro, however you want to call me. So there's something wrong with that. In this time of new celebrities, we forget those that struggle the most, that work the hardest, that don't have the opportunities. I'm standing up here today because my father went to college. It wasn't real tough for me to go to college since my father had gone to college. I'm just thinking how tough it was for him when he worked his way all the way through college and then had to go back to Cuba to med school because the only job he could get was as a bouncer and a croupier in a casino. And that happened to be, and this is true, because my uncle, Miguel Garcia, was Lucky Luciano's bodyguard. Got a great picture of my uncle at Sloppy Joe's in Havana with Frank Sinatra in the 1940s. So I shook hands with somebody, I shook hands with Frank Sinatra. But the reality is, how much do we think of those that don't have? How often do we think about that? Or do we think about what we don't have? You know, I ended up going to college, playing a little bit of football. And when I got up there, it was right after they had desegregated the Southeastern Conference, and the school I was at was one of the last ones there. They desegregated, because my last name was Greer, they naturally assumed I was black. So my roommate, who was the largest human being ever from the state of Georgia, opens the door, looks down at me, and goes, "Shit, I thought you'd be black." And I looked up and said, "It's worse than you think." I said, "I'm Cuban." I said, "We look like them, but we dance like you." And so the two important things I learned there is if they're really big, become their friend. And then the other one is, in this wonderfully diverse society we live in, let's look for what we have in common, not what we have different. If we all work together, we can make a huge difference. When I was in medical school, my little sister, who was about to turn 18, she was up at the University of Florida, called and said she wanted to spend her birthday with me. Well, she never made it. She was killed in a car accident on the way down, which was an amazing time, because I'm 23 years old. I want to save the world. I'm an immigrant male child in a family that has two sisters and two girls and one boy, and I'm supposed to take care of the girls. And boy, do you go through things in your life. I questioned God, the existence of God, got angry, and then on the way to her funeral, since I had to set everything up, and I sat in that limousine, I felt for the first time in my life old. I felt a weight. And then at the funeral, all these elderly people came, because my sister used to volunteer at the homes for the elderly. And I never knew that. And then one time when I was working at Camillus, where I started the clinic, there were some volunteers there, and they told me my sister used to go there all the time in high school. I never knew that. And my little sister did more in 17 years, a week short of 18, than most people do in an entire lifetime. And if that's not something to strive forward and do, what else? The other great lesson she taught me was what it's like to lose somebody, which is the empathy that one needs and the sympathy in front of a patient when you give them bad news. But at that moment, I promised to God that if I ever had a patient, I'd never let him die or suffer alone. Now, there's a problem when you make a promise to God. Where the hell are you going to hide? Well, I figured out City Hall in Miami, because I've seen the decisions they make. And apparently, God doesn't go by City Hall very often. And there was a man dying of tuberculosis in my first rotation at Jackson, intubated of miliary tuberculosis. We turned around, couldn't find his family. I promised I'd look for him. I found a window into a world when Miami was not very compassionate then, where people were taking care of the homeless. And if there was a window, there had to be a door. And that's how we started. We started with a clinic. And back in those days, and Thelma, she'll tell you, City Commission wanted to arrest the homeless on the night of Heat games. Get real. I don't know if you guys remember when the Heat first got here, but I'm pretty competitive, so I went to City Hall, and I told them, I said, really, you want to arrest the homeless on the night of Heat games? The team's 1-13. Arrest the damn coach. Leave the team alone. But those were the battles we fought. When we wanted to build a new shelter, they said we needed a $250,000 garage for parking. Really? For the homeless? So I said, can we make it small with like slots for shopping carts? Or because, I don't really think anybody's driving in. And we ended up and we started a clinic. We had no idea what the hell we were doing. But we knew one thing. There was a problem, there was a wrong, and we had to fix it. But one of the most incredible things that happens when you get to do the kind of work I get to do is you meet people. You meet people that you think you're helping, and it turns around and they help you. It was a Tuesday night at the clinic when a young woman in a tattered red dress came in. She was about 25 years old, but she seemed a lot older. The lines of her battle-weary face barely concealed beneath the smudge of makeup. Her soiled clothes, a swath of spandex, tell the story of her hard life on the streets. Her eyes revealed her turmoil. Whatever her story, she deserved at least a bath and a rest. Carlos, a third-year medical student, went in to see her, came out running, says, Dr. Greer, I can't get a story out of her. She won't stop crying. She won't stop crying. I don't know what to do. You think it's physical, emotional, psychological, drugs? What do you think's going on? Opens the chart, says, I don't know. She's been here once before. Says a derm problem. Ah, he says, does smoke crack. Must be the perks of prostitution. We stepped into the room and we found a desperate woman. We calmed her down. We examined her. Told her she had pelvic inflammatory disease and other sexually transmitted diseases. In between her gasps and her crying, when I said, why didn't you go to the gynecologist at the public health unit, she said, Doc, look at me. Look how I'm dressed. And then she started to cry and she says, you know why I'm here? We said, why? She goes, I was raped. Raped hard last night. A person in the streets of my city is violated. And because of the comments we would make about how a person looks or how they dress, they can't get the help they need. What did I learn from her? And I've had great mentors and I've had Nobel Prize winning laureates as teachers. What did I learn? I learned that we can do great things and build big things, but you can't build a soul. And because we offered an opening, she was able to come in. And how do we save the world? We started one person at a time. Forget that page. That's apparently not a good one. But what I was going to end up with was a story of walking in one day into the pediatric unit. This was one of the most impactful stories. And there was a mother there with her 3 kids from the Salvation Army. And I went to the youngest boy, probably 6 years old, a sweet kid, sweet smile. You know what it's like to be a homeless child? Where you get hand-me-downs, what nobody wants. And then when you're going to give them care, we'd say, come to Camillus, because we all know that's for homeless folks. God forbid. We should label in this capitalistic society we live in. And I had a sandwich. I'm a non-purging bulimic, so obviously I didn't need it. And I gave it to the youngest boy. And he took the sandwich out of the bag. And he broke it in half. Took a bite out, put it back in the wrapper, and then stuck it in his pocket. And I couldn't figure out why he did that. I got to go to college. I got my doctoral. I did postdoctoral degrees. What the hell is this kid doing? And I asked him, I said, why'd you do that? And that little boy looked up at me and said, it's for my brothers. He was hungry, but he knew how hungry they were. I live in Coral Gables, which I refer to as the city for the financially gifted. You bring a sandwich into my neighborhood, they'll hire a tester before they eat it. And here's a child that gave me a lesson much greater than any of my professors ever did, and much greater than I can ever give a student. That God has allowed me to study medicine. He's given me inspiring mentors and great professors. And at any moment, I get postgraduate lessons. The death of my sister, the young woman that was raped, a little 6-year-old boy that's homeless. And if you look at the statistics, he's going to end up homeless or very poor too. Yet this child gave me this great lesson. And if I'm going to end up now, because it says 0, 0, 0, 0, all I can say is, if we're going to save the world, let's each and every one of us become that 6-year-old child. Thank you.